Chapter 1. The Stranger's Rescue. Lyra didn't know that the man who would save her life was the Alpha King of the Northern Territories. She didn't know he'd been searching for his destined mate for 7 years, growing more desperate with each passing season. And she certainly didn't know that the golden thread of warmth she would feel when he touched her marked her as his queen. All she knew was the burn in her lungs as she crashed through the forest, branches tearing at the borrowed servant's dress that hung loose on her too thin frame. Behind her the thunder of hooves grew closer. There, the girl with the dark hair! The assassin's shout sent ice through her veins. Lyra stumbled, her bare feet slipping on wet leaves, but forced herself to keep running. The image burned behind her eyes. Lord Blackwood's study, the flash of a blade, Ambassador Thorne's blood spreading across ancient maps. She'd only been cleaning the fireplace. She wasn't supposed to see anything, but she had seen. Everything. The horse's breathing was so close now she could feel the heat of it on her neck. A sword sang from its sheath behind her. Nowhere to run now, little mouse. Lyra's foot caught on a root, and she went down hard, her palms scraping against stone. The taste of copper filled her mouth. This was it. This was how she died, not from the years of hunger or the brutal winters in the servants' quarters, but because she'd witnessed something she was never meant to see. She rolled onto her back, looking up at the mounted assassin. His smile was cold steel. Lord Blackwood sends his regards. The blade began its descent, and then the assassin simply wasn't there any more. Lyra blinked, certain she was hallucinating from blood loss. Where the mounted killer had been, there was only empty air and the whisper of displaced leaves floating to the ground. The horse reared, screaming, before bolting deeper into the woods. "You're bleeding!" The voice came from her left, low, rough, impossibly calm given what had just happened. Lyra turned her head and felt her breath catch. A man stood in the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy, and something in her chest did a strange flutter. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing the practical leather and wool of a ranger or woodsman. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and when their eyes met, the world seemed to tilt sideways. His eyes were storm grey, and they held an intensity that made her feel like he was seeing straight through to her soul. What happened to—" She tried to sit up, wincing at the pain in her side. He won't be troubling anyone again. The stranger moved closer, his steps careful and controlled. There were 3 others, they're handled. 3 others? Lyra's mind reeled. She'd only seen one pursuing her. How had this man known about the others? And how had he dealt with 4 armed assassins without so much as breathing hard? "Who are you?" she whispered. "Kieran." He crouched beside her, and suddenly the air seemed charged with electricity. "And you're hurt worse than you realise?" His hand moved toward her face, and Lyra flinched back instinctively. She'd learned long ago that when powerful men reached for servant girls, nothing good followed. But Kieran's hand stopped immediately, hanging in the air between them. "I need to check your head wound. You're bleeding into your eyes." She was? Lyra raised trembling fingers to her forehead, and they came away crimson. When had that happened? "I won't hurt you." His voice was impossibly gentle. "I give you my word." Something in his tone made her look at him again. There was no hunger in his gaze, no cruel calculation, just concern and something else, something warm and protective that made her chest ache with longing for things she'd never had. "I don't know you," she said weakly. "No," Kieran agreed, "but I'm going to help you anyway. Will you let me?" The question hung between them, and Lyra felt something shift inside her chest. When was the last time someone had asked her permission for anything? When was the last time someone had offered help without demanding payment she couldn't afford to give? She nodded, barely a movement. His hand was warm against her forehead, fingers gentle as they probed the cut along her hairline. And the moment his skin touched hers, everything changed. Golden warmth spread from his touch, racing down her spine like liquid sunlight. Her breath caught, and she felt something impossible. Safe. For the first time in her 22 years, surrounded by blood and death in the middle of a dark forest, she felt safe. Kieran's hand stilled against her skin, and she saw his eyes widen slightly. Could he feel it too? This strange pull, like a golden thread connecting them. "What is this?" she breathed. "I don't know." But something in his voice suggested he might know more than he was saying. "We need to move. They'll send more when these don't return." "They?" Lyra's stomach clenched. "There are more. Lord Blackwood has deep pockets and shallow morals, but they won't find you." His hand slipped under her elbow, helping her to her feet with surprising care. "I promise you that." The golden warmth didn't fade when he released her. If anything, it seemed to intensify, like her body was trying to stay connected to his. Lyra wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how thin and ragged she must look. What must this man think of her? This stranger who moved like a predator and spoke like a protector who had appeared from nowhere to save her life. "Why?" The words slipped out before she could stop it. "Why what? Why are you helping me? You don't know me. I'm nobody. I'm nothing." Something fierce flashed across Kieran's features, gone so quickly she almost missed it. "Everyone is somebody to someone. Not me. Especially you." The words were spoken with such quiet conviction that Lyra felt tears threaten. She blinked them back furiously. She couldn't afford to cry. Tears were a luxury for people who had someone to comfort them after. "I don't have anywhere to go," she admitted, the words barely audible. "They'll find me anywhere I run." "Not where I'm taking you." "And where is that?" Kieran's smile was small, but somehow devastating. "Somewhere safe. Somewhere they'll never think to look." He held out his hand, and Lyra stared at it. Long fingers, calloused palms, a small scar across the knuckles, a working man's hand, but there was something about the way he held himself that spoke of authority, of power held in careful check. The smart thing would be to refuse. She didn't know this man, didn't know his intentions. For all she knew, he could be worse than the assassins. But when she looked into his storm-grey eyes, all her survival instincts went quiet. The golden warmth pulsed in her chest, and for once in her life, Lyra decided to trust the feeling instead of the fear. She placed her hand in his. The moment their fingers intertwined, the golden thread blazed to life between them, and Lyra understood with startling clarity that her life had just taken a turn from which there would be no going back. "Come," Kieran said, his thumb brushing once across her knuckles. "Let me take you home." Home. The word sent another wash of warmth through her, though she couldn't understand why. She'd never had a home. She'd never belonged anywhere. But as Kieran led her deeper into the forest, his hand warm and steady around hers, something whispered in her chest that maybe, impossibly, that was about to change. Chapter 2. The King Revealed. The cabin appeared through the trees like something from a dream. Tucked into a grove of ancient oaks, it looked impossibly cosy, with warm light spilling from diamond-paned windows and smoke curling from a stone chimney. Lyra had expected a ranger's rough shelter, not this haven of comfort and safety. "This is yours?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "One of them." Kieran's answer was casual, but something in his tone made her glance at him sharply. How many homes did a ranger need? He led her up wooden steps worn smooth by years of use, his hand still warm and steady around hers. The golden thread between them hummed with each step, and Lyra found herself cataloguing details about him, the way he moved with predatory grace, the way his eyes swept their surroundings even here, the way he seemed to take up more space than his physical form should allow. Inside, the cabin was even more surprising. Rich tapestries hung on the walls, and the furniture was simple but well crafted. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across shelves lined with books. This wasn't the home of a simple woodsman. "Sit," Kieran said gently, guiding her to a chair beside the fire. "Let me clean those cuts properly." Lyra sank into the soft cushions and tried not to moan at the relief. When was the last time she'd sat in a real chair? The servants' quarters at Blackwood Manor had only hard stools and thin mattresses on the floor. Kieran moved around the cabin with easy familiarity, gathering supplies from various cupboards. Water, clean cloth, a small jar of something that smelled of herbs. His movements were efficient, purposeful, and Lyra found herself studying the way his shoulders moved beneath his shirt. "You're staring," he said without turning around, and she felt heat flood her cheeks. "I'm sorry, You're not what I expected when you said ranger." "And what did you expect?" "Someone rougher, someone—" She struggled for words. "Someone who wouldn't have books." Kieran's smile was soft as he returned to her side, kneeling beside her chair. "I like to read." The simple admission did something strange to her chest. In her world, reading was a luxury for the wealthy. Servants weren't supposed to know their letters, though Lyra had learned in secret, stealing moments with discarded books when her master wasn't watching. "What do you read?" she asked. "History, philosophy, poetry." His fingers were gentle as he cleaned the cut on her forehead, but his touch still sent warmth spiraling through her. Stories about brave women who saved themselves. Something in his voice made her look at his face. There was an intensity there, a weight of meaning she didn't understand. "I'm not brave," she murmured. "You survived Blackwood Manor. You witnessed a murder and ran instead of staying silent. You trusted a stranger in the woods." His thumb brushed across her cheek, feather-light. "That sounds brave to me." Tears threatened again, and this time Lyra couldn't blink them back. "I was so scared. Fear doesn't make you weak, it makes you smart." The words were spoken with such conviction that Lyra felt something shift inside her chest. This man, this stranger who'd saved her life, saw strength where she only saw cowardice. "Why did they kill the ambassador?" she asked, needing to focus on something other than the way Kieran was looking at her. His hands stilled against her skin. "What exactly did you see?" "Lord Blackwood and two men I didn't recognise. They were talking about trade routes, something about blocking supply lines to the Northern Territories. The ambassador refused, said his king would never agree to such treachery." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "That's when Blackwood drew the blade." Kieran was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight. When he spoke, his voice carried an edge of steel. "Ambassador Thorne was a good man, an honest man." "You knew him?" "I know many people." Another non-answer. Lyra studied Kieran's face, noting the way his features had hardened, the way his eyes had gone cold as winter storms. There was something he wasn't telling her, something important. "The men with Blackwood," she continued. "One had a scar across his throat, the other wore a ring with a black stone. Marcus Vale and Connor Blackthorne, Blackwood's bastard son." Kieran's voice was grim. "They've been working to destabilise trade between the Northern Territories and the Southern Kingdoms for months." "How do you know that?" Kieran was quiet for a moment, his hands resuming their gentle ministrations. "Because it's my job to know." Before Lyra could ask what that meant, he was standing, moving to the small kitchen area. "You need food. When did you last eat?" The change of subject was so abrupt that Lyra blinked. Yesterday, I think, maybe the day before." Kieran's back went rigid. 2 days? Food is scarce in the servants' quarters. We eat what the family doesn't finish." The sound he made was low and dangerous, and Lyra found herself pressing back into the chair. She'd forgotten, in the warmth and safety of the cabin, that this man was lethal, that he'd dispatched 4 assassins without breaking a sweat. "You'll never go hungry again." The promise was spoken with such fierce certainty that Lyra's breath caught. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Don't I? There it was again, that weight of meaning, like he was saying something entirely different from his actual words. Kieran began pulling ingredients from various cupboards, and Lyra watched in fascination as he prepared a meal. His movements were sure and practiced, and she found herself wondering what other surprises this mysterious man held. "My parents died when I was 16, he said suddenly, his voice quiet. Fever took them within days of each other. Lyra's heart clenched. "I'm sorry. I was angry for a long time, angry at the world, at fate, at the unfairness of it all." He glanced at her over his shoulder. "I thought I'd never feel whole again." "What changed?" "I learned that sometimes the universe takes things away so it can give you something better, something you never knew you needed." The golden thread pulsed between them, and Lyra felt her cheeks warm. Was he talking about her? Impossible. She was nothing, a servant, a nobody. What could she possibly give a man like him? The sound of approaching horses shattered the intimate moment. Kieran went still, his hand moving instinctively to the blade at his side. "Kieran of House Thorn," called a voice from outside, "by order of His Majesty, you are commanded to return to the capital immediately." Lyra felt the blood drain from her face. His Majesty? What did the king want with a ranger? Unless— "Stay here," Kieran murmured, but Lyra was already standing, following him to the window. Outside, a dozen men in royal livery sat mounted in the clearing. Their leader wore the gold sash of a captain, and when he spoke again, his words made Lyra's world tilt sideways. "Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion, but urgent matters require your immediate attention." Your Majesty. Lyra's legs gave out, and she would have hit the floor if Kieran hadn't caught her. She stared up at him with wide, disbelieving eyes as the truth crashed over her like a cold wave. The storm-grey eyes, the predatory grace, the way he spoke of knowing people, of books and philosophy and trade routes between kingdoms. "You're him," she whispered. "You're the Alpha King." Kieran's face was gentle but resigned. "Yes, She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The most powerful man in the Northern Territories had saved her, had touched her, had promised she'd never go hungry again, and she was nobody, nothing, a servant girl who'd witnessed a murder and run like a coward through the woods. "Lyra," his voice was soft, urgent. "Look at me." She met his eyes, those impossibly beautiful storm-grey eyes, and felt tears spill down her cheeks. "This changes nothing," he said fiercely. "Do you understand me? Nothing." But it changed everything. It changed absolutely everything. "Sire," the captain called again, "we must return before nightfall." Kieran looked toward the door, then back at Lyra, and she saw something like anguish cross his features. "I have to go, but I'll be back." "You don't understand." Lyra pulled free of his arms, wrapping herself in the borrowed cloak. "Lord Blackwood has connections everywhere. He has the ear of nobles, of merchants, of no one who matters more than you do." The words hit her like a physical blow. "I'm a servant. You're—" He stopped himself, jaw clenching. "You're under my protection. That's all that matters." "Your Majesty!" The captain's voice was growing impatient. "The council awaits." Kieran muttered something under his breath that sounded decidedly unkingly, then turned back to Lyra. "There's food, clean clothes, books, everything you need. The cabin is warded. No one can enter without my permission." "Warded?" "Protected by magic older than kingdoms. You're safe here." Magic, of course. Because apparently her life had become a fairy tale, complete with a king who saved servant girls and spoke of golden threads and promises that felt too good to be true. "I'll return as soon as I can," Kieran continued. 2 days, maybe 3. "What if you don't?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, raw and vulnerable. Something fierce blazed in Kieran's eyes. "I will. I promise you that." He moved toward the door, then stopped, looking back at her one more time. "Lyra? Yes? You're not nobody to me." And then he was gone, leaving her alone in a cabin that smelled like safety and books and the lingering warmth of a king who'd looked at her like she was precious. Lyra sank back into the chair by the fire and tried to make sense of what had just happened. An hour ago, she'd been running for her life. Now she was under the protection of the Alpha King himself, sitting in his private retreat, wearing his cloak. The golden thread hummed in her chest, stronger now that she knew the truth. Whatever this connection was between them, it didn't care about crowns or kingdoms or the impossible distance between a king and a servant girl. But maybe that was exactly what made it so terrifying. Outside, the sound of horses faded into the distance, taking her mysterious saviour back to his throne and his responsibilities and his world of power and politics, leaving her alone with the impossible truth that the Alpha King of the Northern Territories had looked at her, really looked at her, and somehow found her worth saving. Chapter 3. Crisis of Worth. 3 days passed in the cabin like a dream Lyra was afraid to wake from. She read books whose pages had never been touched by servant hands. She ate meals that filled the hollow ache in her belly for the first time in years. She slept in a bed so soft it felt like floating on clouds, and every moment the golden thread in her chest pulled tighter, as if her very soul was trying to follow wherever the king had gone. She was curled in the window seat with a volume of poetry when the riders appeared through the trees. Not the royal guards who had summoned Kieran away, but men in the black and silver of House Blackwood. Her former master sat his horse like a conqueror, his cruel mouth curved in satisfaction. Lyra's blood turned to ice. The led rider dismounted and approached the cabin door. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Lyra of no house, no family, no name," Lord Blackwood called. "I know you're in there, girl. Come out, and perhaps I'll be merciful." Her hands shook as she set the book aside. The wards Kieran had mentioned, surely they would protect her. But even as she thought it, she heard the creak of the front door opening. "The Alpha King's magic is strong," Blackwood continued conversationally as he stepped inside, "but not stronger than the ancient bloodlines. My grandmother was a sorceress, you see. I know how to slip through cracks in even the most powerful protections." He appeared in the doorway of the sitting room, flanked by 2 of his men. Up close, his face was even more terrible than she remembered. Sharp cheekbones and pale eyes that seemed to see right through her. "There you are, my dear. How lovely you look, all clean and fed. The king has been taking good care of his little pet, hasn't he?" Lyra pressed herself back against the window, but there was nowhere to run. "The king said I was under his protection." "The king says many things, but I wonder, does he know what you really are? Does he know about your dear departed mother?" Something cold and terrible unfurled in Lyra's stomach. "What are you talking about?" "Oh, my sweet girl, did you think I took you into my household out of kindness?" Blackwood's laugh was like broken glass. "Your mother was Elena Ravencrest, youngest daughter of the house that tried to usurp the northern throne 23 years ago. The entire bloodline was supposed to be executed for treason, but she escaped, didn't she? Hid among the common folk, changed her name, bore a bastard daughter in shame." The words hit Lyra like physical blows. "You're lying." "Am I? Tell me, girl, have you never wondered why you can read when you were never taught? Why you understand the languages of diplomacy and war when you hear them spoken? Why the king's magic called to yours the moment you touched?" The golden thread pulsed in her chest, and suddenly Lyra understood with sick clarity why it had felt so familiar. Magic recognized magic, power called to power, and she was the daughter of traitors. "Even if that were true," she whispered, "it changes nothing. I'm not my mother." "Aren't you? Blood tells, my dear, and your blood is poison to any man who would rule justly." Blackwood took a step closer, and she could smell the malice radiating from him. The king is young, idealistic. He sees a pretty face and a sad story and thinks he's found something worth protecting. But when he learns the truth, when his counsel reminds him of what your family tried to do to his... How long do you think his protection will last? He wouldn't... But the words died in her throat, because how could she know what Kieran would do? She'd known him for 3 days. She was nobody to him, nothing more than a stray he'd taken pity on. "I have a proposition," Blackwood continued smoothly. "Come with me now, quietly, and I'll ensure your death is quick, clean. The king need never know what you really are. Stay, and when he discovers the truth, I'll make sure he knows you deceived him, that you wormed your way into his bed under false pretenses, just like your treacherous mother tried to do with his father." We never, didn't you? Then explain the bond I can see singing between you even now. Explain why the most powerful man in the realm abandoned urgent kingdom business to save one insignificant servant girl. His pale eyes glittered with cruel satisfaction. "Face it, child, you're exactly what your mother was, a seductress using her tainted magic to ensnare good men for treacherous purposes." The words struck like poison arrows, each one finding its mark in the deepest parts of her soul. Because wasn't that exactly what she'd feared? That the connection between her and Kieran was too good to be true, too impossible to last. "I'll give you until sunset to decide," Blackwood said, turning toward the door. "Come willingly, or I'll send word to the capital about what the king is really harbouring in his private retreat. Either way, girl, this ends today." The cabin fell silent after he left, but the echoes of his words seemed to ring from every surface. Lyra sank to the floor, her legs no longer able to support her weight. A traitor's daughter, the child of people who had tried to destroy everything Kieran's family had built. How could she have been so naive as to think a king could care for someone like her? The golden thread pulsed again, stronger now, and she could feel Kieran's presence like a warm hand on her shoulder. He was coming back. She could sense his approach like a storm on the horizon, fierce and protective and utterly devoted. But how could she face him now, knowing what she was? How could she let him risk his throne, his kingdom, his very life for someone whose blood marked her as his enemy? She was reaching for her cloak when the door burst open. Kieran stood in the doorway like an avenging angel, his chest heaving as if he'd ridden hard and fast. The moment his eyes found hers, something in his expression shifted from relief to fury. "What did he say to you?" "How did you—" "I felt your distress through the bond. I was 2 days' ride away and I felt it." He crossed to her in 3 swift strides, his hands framing her face with desperate gentleness. "What did Blackwood say to you?" The concern in his voice, the fierce protectiveness in his touch, it only made everything worse. "You have to let me go. Like hell. You don't understand. I'm not who you think I am." The words tumbled out of her in a rush. "My mother was Elena Ravencrest. My blood is tainted. I'm the daughter of traitors, and if your people discover you're protecting me—" "I know." The simple statement stopped her cold. "What?" "I've known since the moment I touched you. I felt your magic, recognised the signature of the Ravencrest line." His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones, wiping away tears she hadn't realised were falling. "I know exactly who you are. Lyra." "Then why?" Her voice cracked. "Why risk everything for someone whose family tried to destroy yours?" "Because you're not your mother. You're not your family. You're you." The words were spoken with such fierce conviction that she felt something crack open in her chest. "Because the moment I saw you, bleeding and afraid and still fighting to survive, I knew you were mine. Not because of magic or bonds or destiny, but because something in your soul called to something in mine. Your people will never accept me. Then they'll learn to? Your council will demand my execution? My council serves at my pleasure, not the other way around." His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "I am the Alpha King of the Northern Territories. I bow to no one. answer to no one, and I sure as hell don't let anyone tell me who I can and cannot protect." "You could lose your throne." "Let them try to take it." The casual confidence in his voice made her breath catch. This was what real power looked like, not Blackwood's cruel manipulation, but the quiet certainty of a man who had never doubted his right to rule. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know, but you don't have to be scared alone anymore." His forehead dropped to rest against hers, and the golden thread between them blazed to life, warm and steady and unbreakable. "I told you before, you're not nobody to me, you're everything." "How can you say that? You barely know me." "I know you survived years of cruelty without letting it make you cruel in return. I know you risked your life to bear witness to evil rather than stay silent. I know you read poetry by firelight and cry over stories about brave women saving themselves." His voice softened. "I know the sound of your laugh and the way you think before you speak and how you take care of wounded birds you find in the garden." "I don't have a garden." "You will." The promise hung between them, full of futures she'd never dared imagine. A garden, a place where she belonged, a life where someone knew the sound of her laugh because they'd be there to hear it every day. Blackwood said he'd expose me if I stayed. Then I suppose I'll have to deal with Blackwood. Something in his tone made her look up sharply. "Kieran, no, you can't." "He threatened what's mine. That makes it my business." The wolf was showing now, all predatory focus and lethal intent. "He killed Ambassador Thorne. He sent assassins after you. He violated the sanctuary of my private retreat to terrorize an innocent woman under my protection." "I'm hardly innocent. You're innocent of everything that matters." His hands slid down to grip her shoulders. "Your mother's crimes aren't yours to carry. Your family's sins aren't your burden to bear. But your people will learn to love their future queen as much as I do." The words hit her like a physical blow. Queen. He'd said queen. "I'm not. I can't." "You can. You are." His smile was soft and devastating. "Do you think I didn't know what I was claiming when I brought you here? Do you think I didn't understand exactly what it would mean to choose you? Choosing me could destroy everything you've built. And losing you would destroy everything I am." The simple truth of it stole her breath. In the warm glow of the firelight, with his hand steady on her skin, and his storm-grey eyes full of promises, Lyra felt the last of her resistance crumble. "I don't know how to be what you need." "You don't have to know. We'll figure it out together." "What if I'm not strong enough?" "Then I'll be strong enough for both of us until you are." The golden thread pulsed between them, and suddenly Lyra understood that this wasn't about worthiness or bloodlines or the fears that had shaped her entire life. This was about choice, about two people looking at each other and deciding that whatever came next, they would face it together. "Kieran?" "Yes." "Don't let me go." His arms came around her then, holding her against his chest like she was something precious and irreplaceable. "Never," he whispered into her hair. "I promise you that. Whatever comes next, whatever threats we face, whatever battles we have to fight, I will never let you go." And for the first time in her life, Lyra believed that someone meant it when they promised to stay. Outside, darkness was falling, and somewhere in that darkness Lord Blackwood was waiting for her answer. But she was no longer afraid, because she was no longer alone. The golden thread hummed between them, steady and sure, and Lyra finally understood what it meant to be claimed by an Alpha King. It meant being seen, being known, being chosen not in spite of her flaws, but because of everything she was. It meant coming home. Chapter 4. The King's Claiming. The great hall of the Northern Palace had never felt so vast or so suffocating. Lyra stood at Kieran's side, her hand resting on his arm, trying not to flinch under the weight of 100 noble gazes. The dress he'd given her, deep blue silk that matched the royal colours, felt like armour and exposure all at once. "You don't have to do this," she whispered, as the herald announced the arrival of Lord Blackwood's party. "Yes, I do." Kieran's voice was quiet steel. He threatened you in my own sanctuary. He called you property. That ends today." The massive oak doors swung open, and Lord Blackwood strode into the hall like a conquering hero. He'd dressed for the occasion, rich black velvet trimmed with silver, the colours of his house displayed prominently. Behind him came his bastard son Connor, the scarred man Marcus Vale, and a dozen armed guards. But it was the scroll in Blackwood's hand that made Lyra's blood turn to ice, the formal petition he'd promised to deliver if she refused his ultimatum. "Your Majesty," Blackwood called, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. "I come before you today with a heavy heart and urgent concerns for the safety of your realm." Kieran said nothing, but Lyra felt the predatory stillness that came over him. She'd seen it once before, in the forest, just before he'd dispatched 4 assassins with lethal precision. "Speak your concerns, Lord Blackwood," Kieran replied, his tone carefully neutral. "It has come to my attention that you are harbouring a dangerous criminal in your private residence, a woman whose very bloodline poses a threat to everything your family has built." A murmur ran through the assembled nobles. Lyra felt their eyes on her like physical weight, saw the moment recognition dawned on some of their faces. The Ravencrest name still carried power, even 23 years after the failed coup. "That's a serious accusation," Kieran said mildly. "Do you have proof of these claims?" Blackwood's smile was triumphant. "Indeed I do, Your Majesty. May I present evidence that the woman standing beside you is Lyra Ravencrest, daughter of the traitor Eleanor, who tried to seduce your father and claim the Northern throne through treachery and dark magic." He unrolled the scroll with theatrical flourish, displaying documents that looked official and damning: birth records, bloodline charts, even a faded portrait that bore an unmistakable resemblance to Lyra's face. Impossible!" breathed Lady Westmere, one of the king's most trusted advisers. "The entire Ravencrest line was executed." "All save one," Blackwood replied smoothly. "Elena escaped, hid among common servants, and bore this bastard child in secret. The girl has been using the same seductive magic that nearly brought down the realm 23 years ago. She has ensnared our young king, just as her mother tried to ensnare his father." The accusations hung in the air like poison, and Lyra felt the hostile energy of the room shift toward her. She wanted to run, to hide, to disappear into the shadows where she belonged. But Kieran's hand covered hers, warm and steady, anchoring her to the moment. "Furthermore," Blackwood continued, "I have witnesses who will testify that this woman murdered Ambassador Thorne in cold blood when he discovered her true identity." "That's a lie!" Lyra spoke before she could stop herself, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. "You killed the ambassador when he refused to betray his alliance with the Northern Territories." "Ah, so she admits to being present at the ambassador's death," Blackwood said silkily. "How convenient. Tell me, girl, what were you doing in my private study that night if not carrying out an assassination?" "I was cleaning the fireplace. I saw you murder him when he wouldn't agree to block trade routes to the north." The desperate lies of a cornered spy. "Your Majesty, I demand this woman be arrested immediately and charged with treason, murder, and crimes against the crown." The hall erupted into chaos. Nobles shouted over each other, some demanding Lyra's immediate execution, others calling for a formal investigation. Through it all, Kieran remained perfectly still, his storm-grey eyes fixed on Lord Blackwood with predatory focus. "Enough." The single word cut through the noise like a blade, and the hall fell silent. When Kieran spoke again, his voice carried the absolute authority of a man born to rule. "Lord Blackwood, you stand in my hall, before my court, and dare to call my chosen mate a murderer and a spy." Chosen mate! The word sent a ripple of shock through the assembled nobles, but Kieran continued without pause. "You claim she seduced me with dark magic. You suggest I am too weak, too foolish, too easily manipulated to recognise treachery in my own bed." His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Are you questioning my judgment, Lord Blackwood, my fitness to rule?" For the first time Blackwood looked uncertain. "Of course not, Your Majesty. I merely suggest that you have been deceived." "I suggest," Kieran interrupted, rising from his throne, "that you have forgotten your place." The king stepped down from the dais, and every person in the hall seemed to hold their breath. Lyra had never seen him like this, not gentle Kieran who read poetry by firelight, but the Alpha King in all his terrible glory. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge, and she understood suddenly why entire armies had bent the knee to his family for generations. "You speak of crimes, Lord Blackwood. Let us discuss crimes." Kieran's voice was conversational now, which somehow made it infinitely more threatening. "Ambassador Thorn was found dead in your study, bearing wounds from your personal blade. The same blade you've carried for 20 years. The one with the distinctive curved crossguard that left its mark in his chest." Blackwood went pale. "That proves nothing. The girl could have stolen—" "Could have, yes, but didn't." Kieran smiled, and it was terrifying. "Because Ambassador Thorn didn't die immediately, you see. He lived long enough to write a message in his own blood. The same blood you were too arrogant to clean from beneath his fingernails before his body was discovered." The king gestured, and Captain Hayes stepped forward with a small cloth bundle. Inside was a ring, the ambassador's signet, and etched into the metal were 4 letters scratched with desperate dying fingers. B-L-A-C. "Black for Blackwood," Kieran said conversationally. "His final testimony, written in blood and witnessed by the gods themselves." The hall erupted again, but this time the anger was directed at Blackwood. Several nobles were already backing away from him, recognising the shift in power. "Furthermore," Kieran continued, "my investigators have uncovered evidence of your conspiracy to destabilise trade between the northern and southern kingdoms. We have records of your meetings with foreign agents, documentation of bribes paid to dock workers, and testimony from merchants who were threatened into compliance." "This is ridiculous," Blackwood snarled, but his composure was cracking. "You have no proof." "I have Connor Blackthorne in my dungeons," Kieran said calmly. "Your bastard son has been quite talkative since his arrest this morning. Amazing what a man will confess when faced with the headsman's axe." Blackwood spun toward the doors, but royal guards were already moving to block his escape. The trap had been perfectly laid, and only now was he beginning to understand how completely he'd been outmanoeuvred. "You planned this," he whispered, staring at Kieran with dawning horror. "I planned to deal with a traitor who threatened what was mine," Kieran replied. "The fact that you walked willingly into my hall to confess your crimes in public merely saved me the trouble of hunting you down. The girl is still a Ravencrest. Her blood is still poison." "Her blood," Kieran said, turning to look at Lyra with such tenderness that her heart stopped, "is precious beyond measure, because it flows through the veins of my mate, my queen, the woman I have chosen to stand beside me and rule this kingdom." He crossed to her then, taking her hands in his, and spoke loud enough for every person in the hall to hear. "Lyra of House Ravencrest, I claim you before gods and witnesses, not because of magic or bonds or destiny, but because you are brave and kind and true, because you chose to bear witness to evil rather than stay silent, because you survived years of cruelty without letting it break your spirit." His voice softened, but the words still carried to every corner of the hall. "Because when I look at you, I see not the sins of your family, but the promise of our future." "Kieran," she whispered, tears streaming down her face, "will you have me, Lyra? Will you be my queen, my partner, my equal in all things? Will you help me build a kingdom worthy of the woman you've already become?" The hall held its breath. In the silence, Lyra could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the golden thread singing between them, could see their entire future stretching out like a promise. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Yes to all of it." The kiss that followed was witnessed by gods and nobles alike, sealing a bond that had been written in starlight and forged in fire. When they broke apart, the hall erupted in cheers, not the polite applause of political necessity, but genuine joy from people who had seen their king claim his happiness. "Guards," Kieran called, without taking his eyes off Lyra's face. "Arrest Lord Blackwood and his conspirators. They will stand trial for treason, murder, and crimes against the crown." As Blackwood was dragged away, still shouting protests that no one bothered to hear, Kieran cupped Lyra's face in his hands. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "I think so." She leaned into his touch, marvelling at how safe she felt despite everything that had just happened. "How long have you known? About Blackwood, I mean." "Since the night you told me what you witnessed. I've had investigators watching him for months, but we needed proof. Your testimony was the final piece." "You used me as bait." "I used us both as bait," he corrected, "but I never would have let him hurt you. I promise you that." Lyra looked around the hall at the nobles who were now watching her with curiosity rather than hostility, at the guards who had moved to protect rather than arrest her, at the man who had just claimed her as his queen before the entire kingdom. "What happens now?" she asked. Kieran's smile was soft and devastating. "Now we plan a coronation. Now we build the life we both deserve. Now we rule together. And if people still object to my bloodline, then they can learn to live with disappointment." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "You are mine, Lyra, my mate, my queen, my everything, and I protect what's mine." The golden thread hummed between them, stronger than ever, and Lyra finally understood what it meant to be truly claimed by an Alpha King. It meant being seen for who she was, not who her family had been. It meant being chosen not in spite of her past, but because of who she'd become despite it. It meant standing in a hall full of the most powerful people in the kingdom and knowing without doubt that she belonged. "I love you," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "I love you too," he replied without hesitation. "More than kingdoms, more than crowns, more than life itself." And as the court celebrated around them, as nobles came forward to offer their congratulations and their loyalty, Lyra felt the last of her fears dissolve. She was no longer running, no longer hiding. She was home. Chapter 5. Healing and Belonging. The weeks that followed Blackwood's arrest were a whirlwind of change that left Lyra feeling dizzy and dreamlike. One moment she was a servant girl hiding in shadows. The next she was the publicly claimed mate of the Alpha King, with ladies-in-waiting and tutors and an entire wing of the palace for her personal use. It should have been overwhelming. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like finally being able to breathe. "You're staring at yourself again," Kieran observed from the doorway of her chambers, amusement dancing in his storm-grey eyes. Lyra turned from the mirror where she'd been studying her reflection, not out of vanity, but out of wonder. The woman looking back at her wore silk and jewels, her dark hair dressed in elaborate braids, but more than that, she looked happy. When was the last time she'd seen happiness in her own face? "I keep expecting to wake up," she admitted, "to find myself back in the servants' quarters, with all of this being just a beautiful dream." Kieran crossed to her, his hands settling warm and familiar on her shoulders. "And if you did? If you woke up back there?" "I think I'd spend the rest of my life trying to dream my way back to you." The smile he gave her was soft and devastating. "Good thing you won't have to." Through the tall windows she could see the gardens spread out below. Her gardens now, Kieran insisted, though she still couldn't quite believe it. She'd spent hours walking the winding paths, marvelling at roses that bloomed in impossible colours and fountains that sang with crystalline voices. "There's something I want to show you," Kieran said, offering her his arm. "If you're ready." "What kind of something?" "The kind that might make you cry, but good tears, I think." Intrigued, Lyra let him lead her through corridors she was still learning to navigate. The palace was vast, with wings dating back centuries and rooms that seemed to multiply when she wasn't looking. But Kieran moved through it like he'd been born to rule these halls, which she supposed he had. They stopped before a door she hadn't seen before, its oak surface carved with intricate roses and ravens, the merged symbols of their houses, she realized with a start. Kieran, what? Trust me. She looked at him, this man who had saved her life and claimed her heart and somehow made her believe she was worthy of being loved. Always. He opened the door, and Lyra's breath caught. The room beyond was a library, but unlike any she'd ever imagined. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined the walls, filled with more books than she could count in a lifetime. Comfortable chairs were positioned near tall windows, and a fireplace crackled warmly in one corner. But it was the young woman seated at a reading desk who made Lyra's world tilt sideways. Mira! Her sister looked up, and Lyra saw her own shock reflected in familiar green eyes. The years had been kinder to Mira. She was clean and healthy, wearing a simple but well-made dress, her auburn hair braided with ribbons. Lyra? Mira's voice was barely a whisper. But how? Lyra was moving before she finished the question, crossing the room in quick strides to pull her sister into a fierce embrace. Mira felt solid and real and alive, and Lyra couldn't stop the tears that came. "I thought you were dead," she sobbed into Mira's shoulder. "When Blackwood took you away, I thought—" "I thought the same about you," Mira replied, clinging just as tightly. "When his men said you'd been killed trying to escape." "He lied." Lyra pulled back to study her sister's face, noting the absence of fear that had always shadowed her before. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" "He tried to sell me to a brothel in the capital," Mira said quietly. "But His Majesty's men intercepted the carriage. They brought me here, said I was under royal protection as your family." Lyra looked over at Kieran, who was watching the reunion with gentle satisfaction. You knew she was alive and you rescued her." "I rescue everyone who belongs to you," he said simply. "Sister, cousin, childhood friend. Anyone who matters to you matters to me." The casual way he said it, like it was the most natural thing in the world to move heaven and earth for people he'd never met, simply because they were important to her, made something crack open in Lyra's chest. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet. There's more." More? Mira was grinning now, the expression transforming her face. "Show her, Your Majesty." Kieran moved to a shelf and pulled down a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with careful handwriting. "Your sister has a gift for languages. She's been helping my scholars translate ancient texts about trade routes and diplomatic protocols." "Mira's helping run the kingdom?" Lyra stared at her sister in amazement. "Someone has to keep track of all the correspondence from the southern kingdoms," Mira said with a shy smile. "Turns out being forced to translate for Blackwood's foreign visitors was good practice." "She's brilliant," Kieran added. "I'm officially making her chief translator for the royal court. The position comes with its own chambers, a library, and a salary that will ensure she never wants for anything." Lyra felt fresh tears threaten. Her sister, her baby sister who'd been sold like property, was going to be a royal official. She was going to be safe and valued and important. "There's a garden cottage," Mira continued, excitement bubbling in her voice, "for you to visit whenever you want. And oh, Lyra, you should see the books. There are volumes here in languages I've never even heard of, and His Majesty says I can learn them all." "She's already mastered 3 new dialects since she arrived," Kieran said proudly. "Your sister is going to revolutionise diplomatic communications in the Northern Territories." The casual pride in his voice, the way he spoke of Mira's achievements like they were his own family's accomplishments, made Lyra's heart swell until she thought it might burst. "Thank you," she said again, but the words felt inadequate. "Thank me by being happy," Kieran replied, "by letting yourself believe that this is real, that you deserve it, that it's not going to be taken away." Over the following days, Lyra began to understand what he meant. She spent mornings with her tutors, learning the intricacies of court protocol and kingdom management. Afternoons were for meetings with various nobles and officials, slowly building the relationships that would make her an effective queen. But the evenings belonged to her and Kieran, quiet hours spent in his private study, or walking through the moonlit gardens. It was during one of these evening walks that she finally voiced the fear that had been growing in her chest. "What if I'm terrible at this?" she asked, stopping beside a fountain carved with dancing wolves. "What if I make mistakes that hurt the kingdom?" "You will make mistakes," Kieran said matter-of-factly. "We all do. I certainly have. But your mistakes are different. You were born to this. You're just the woman who risked her life to bear witness to corruption, who survived years of cruelty without becoming cruel herself, who learned to read in secret and speaks 3 languages and noticed trade inconsistencies in Blackwood's ledgers that my own investigators missed." He cupped her face in his hands. "You're just the person my kingdom has been waiting for." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've seen you with the servants, the way you remember their names, ask about their families, notice when someone's struggling. Because you spent an hour yesterday helping my stable master's daughter with her letters, and when she couldn't afford new shoes, you gave her 3 pairs from your own wardrobe." His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones. "Because when you look at this kingdom, you don't see subjects to rule. You see people to protect." The words settled into her chest like warm honey, healing wounds she hadn't even known were still bleeding. "The council meeting tomorrow," she said quietly. "Lady Westmere thinks I should take a more formal role in trade negotiations with the southern kingdoms." "What do you think?" "I think I might actually be good at it. Languages were always easy for me, and after years of listening to Blackwood's meetings, I understand the undercurrents better than most." She looked up at him. "Does that make me ambitious? Presumptuous?" "It makes you exactly who you're meant to be." That night, as they lay tangled together in the massive bed that was somehow becoming theirs rather than his, Kieran traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Tell me about your dreams," he murmured against her hair. "What dreams?" "For the future, for our kingdom, for the life you want us to build together." Lyra was quiet for a long moment, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "I want children who grow up safe, who never have to wonder where their next meal is coming from, or whether someone will hurt them for asking questions." She turned to face him, studying the strong lines of his face in the moonlight. "I want schools in every village, and libraries, and laws that protect people instead of just property." "Those are good dreams." "Impossible dreams." "Nothing's impossible when you have the crown to back it up." His smile was soft and wicked. "Haven't you learned that yet?" "I'm learning." She pressed a kiss to his collarbone, tasting salt and warmth and the indefinable flavour that was uniquely him. "I'm also learning that I don't have to be perfect to be worthy." "No," he agreed, "you just have to be you." The golden thread hummed between them, stronger than ever, and Lyra marvelled at how natural it felt now, not a supernatural compulsion, but a choice she made every day, a choice to trust, to love, to believe in the impossible. "Kieran, I'm not scared anymore." He pulled her closer, his arms tightening around her. "Good, because tomorrow we start planning the coronation, and the day after that we begin revolutionising trade policy, and next week we're hosting a diplomatic summit that will reshape the political landscape of the continent. And after that we build the kingdom we both dreamed of. We raise children who know they're loved. We grow old together and argue about books and garden designs, and whether our heirs are ready to rule. That sounds perfect. It sounds like home." Home. The word no longer felt foreign on her tongue, no longer carried the sharp edge of longing for something she'd never had, because she'd found it, not in a place, but in a person, in the steady strength of his arms, the gentle certainty of his love, the absolute conviction that she belonged exactly where she was. Outside their windows, the Northern Territories slept peacefully under starlight, protected by a king who would die for his people, and a future queen who understood what it meant to fight for something precious. And in the warm darkness of their chamber, Lyra finally stopped waiting for her happiness to be taken away, because some things, she was learning, were strong enough to last forever. Chapter 6. Forever Claimed. 3 months had passed since the confrontation in the Great Hall, and the Northern Palace had transformed into something alive with preparation. Banners in royal blue and silver hung from every tower, and the scent of flowers filled the air as arrangements were carried through corridors by servants who hummed wedding songs under their breath. Tomorrow would be the coronation. Tomorrow, Lyra would officially become Queen of the Northern Territories, but tonight, as she stood on the balcony of her chambers looking out over the kingdom that would soon be hers to protect, all she could think about was how far she'd come from that terrified girl running through the forest. Second thoughts? Kieran's voice came from behind her, warm and teasing, and she turned to find him leaning against the doorframe. Even after all this time, the sight of him still made her breath catch, especially now when he'd abandoned his formal attire for simple clothes that reminded her of that first night in the cabin. "No second thoughts," she said, moving into his arms with the easy grace that had become second nature. "Just overwhelmed by how perfect everything is." "Everything?" She gestured toward the balcony railing where a small golden bird had landed, chirping cheerfully as it preened its feathers. "Even the wildlife is cooperating for our coronation. I'm starting to think you have magic powers beyond just being an Alpha King." "Maybe I do." His smile was soft and mysterious. "Or maybe the universe is finally making up for all those years we spent apart." The golden thread hummed between them, stronger than ever, and Lyra marvelled at how natural it felt now. Not a supernatural compulsion, but a choice she made every moment of every day. "Walk with me?" Kieran asked, offering his arm. "Where?" "Somewhere we can be alone, away from coronation preparations and royal protocols, and people asking if you've decided between the ruby crown or the sapphire one." Lyra laughed, remembering that particular debate from earlier in the day. "The sapphire, by the way, it matches your eyes." "I was hoping you'd say that." He led her through corridors she now knew by heart, past tapestries that no longer seemed impossibly grand, and through doors that opened at their approach as if the palace itself recognised her right to be there. They ended up in the private garden behind the royal wing, where moonlight turned the roses silver and the fountain sang its crystalline song. "Do you remember," Kieran said, as they settled on the stone bench beside the fountain, "what I told you about brave women who saved themselves? That first night in the cabin, you said you liked to read stories about them." "I lied." His confession was gentle, accompanied by a smile that took any sting from the words. "I don't just like to read about them, I like to marry them." Something in his tone made her look at him more carefully. There was something different about the way he was sitting, a tension that spoke of carefully contained excitement. "Kieran, marry me." The words hung in the air between them, simple and devastating and completely unexpected. "We're already getting married. Tomorrow, in front of the entire kingdom." "That's a coronation," he said, reaching into his pocket to pull out a small velvet box. "A political ceremony that makes you my queen. But before all of that, before the crowns and the vows that belong to the kingdom, I want you to be my wife." He opened the box, and Lyra's breath caught. Inside was a ring unlike anything she'd ever seen. Not the massive ornate jewellery she'd expected, but something delicate and perfect. A band of white gold that seemed to capture starlight, set with a stone that looked like crystallized moonbeams. "It's a moonstone," Kieran explained, his voice soft. "From the northern mountains where the first Alpha King met his mate under stars that promised them eternity. My father gave it to my mother, and his father gave it to his mate, going back 10 generations. Kieran, I can't, it's too much." "It's exactly enough." He slipped from the bench to kneel before her, the ring box balanced in his palm like an offering. "Lyra of House Ravencrest, will you marry me? Not because of bonds or magic or political necessity, but because I love you more than kingdoms, more than crowns, more than my own life." The tears came without warning, spilling down her cheeks as she looked at this man who had saved her, claimed her, chosen her over and over again. "I love you too," she whispered, more than I knew it was possible to love anyone. Is that a yes? That's a yes to everything, to marriage, to forever, to building a life and a kingdom and a future together. She held out her hand, fingers trembling with joy. Yes to all of it. The ring slid onto her finger like it had been made for her, and the moment it settled into place, something shifted in the air around them. The golden thread blazed to life, stronger than it had ever been, and suddenly Lyra could feel not just her own emotions but his, love and joy and fierce protection and a happiness so profound it took her breath away. "Now you're mine," he said, rising to pull her into his arms. "Completely, officially, forever." "I was already yours," she replied, going up on her toes to meet his kiss. "From the moment you touched my hand in that forest." The kiss was soft and sweet and full of promises, and when they broke apart, Kieran's smile was radiant. "So," he said, settling back on the bench and pulling her against his side, "any requests for our wedding night? As your husband, I'm obligated to fulfill your every desire." "My husband," she repeated, testing the words. They felt right in her mouth, like something she'd been waiting her whole life to say. "I like the sound of that." "Good, because you're going to be saying it for the next 60 years or so." "Only 60? Well, we are part wolf. We might get 70 or 80 if we're lucky." The casual way he spoke of their future, like growing old together was as certain as sunrise, made her chest warm with contentment. "In that case, I have a very long list of desires for you to fulfill." "I have time." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring ceremony and celebration, the formal beginning of their reign and the official start of their marriage in the eyes of the kingdom. But tonight was just theirs, two people who had found each other against impossible odds and chosen to build something beautiful together. "Tell me about the children we'll have," Lyra said suddenly. "Children?" Kieran's arm tightened around her. "How many are we talking about?" "At least 3, maybe 4, a nice round number for a royal family." "And what will these hypothetical children be like?" Lyra closed her eyes, letting herself imagine. Strong and kind, like their father, brave enough to stand up for what's right, smart enough to know when diplomacy is better than force. They'll grow up knowing they're loved, knowing they're safe, knowing they can be anything they want to be. "They'll have their mother's eyes," Kieran said softly. "Green like forest shadows, and just as mysterious. And they'll inherit her gift for languages, her compassion for people who are hurting. They'll have their father's sense of justice, his ability to see the best in people even when they can't see it themselves. Our daughter will probably be the first female Alpha King in Northern history," Kieran mused. "She'll revolutionize everything. Our sons will be gentle and fierce in equal measure. They'll protect without dominating, lead without intimidating. They'll grow up in a kingdom where servants' children can become scholars, where birth doesn't determine worth, where everyone has enough to eat and a warm place to sleep." The picture they were painting with words was so vivid, so perfect, that Lyra could almost see it. Children with dark hair and storm-grey eyes, running through palace corridors that echoed with laughter instead of fear. A kingdom where no child would ever have to wonder if they were worthy of love. Kieran? When this is all over, the coronation, the diplomatic meetings, the trade negotiations, can we go back to your cabin? Just for a few days? "Our cabin," he corrected gently. "And yes, we can go anywhere you want." "I want to go back to where it all started, where you first saved me." "You saved yourself," he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I just caught you when you fell." "You did more than that. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me myself." "You already had all of that. You just needed someone to help you see it." The clock tower chimed midnight, and somewhere in the distance they could hear the servants beginning the final preparations for tomorrow's ceremony. In a few hours the palace would be bustling with activity as nobles and dignitaries arrived for the coronation. There would be speeches and ceremonies, formal presentations and ceremonial vows. But right now, in the quiet intimacy of their private garden, it was just them. "My queen," Kieran murmured against her hair. "My king," she replied, and felt him smile. "Ready to rule the world? Ready to rule our world." They stayed there until the first hints of dawn painted the eastern sky, talking about their hopes and dreams and plans for the future. They spoke of the schools they would build, the laws they would change, the children they would raise. They planned diplomatic missions and trade agreements and social reforms that would transform the Northern Territories into something unprecedented. And through it all, the golden thread sang between them, no longer a mysterious pull, but a conscious choice, renewed every moment. As the sun rose on what would be the most important day of their lives, Lyra felt a peace she'd never known before settle into her bones. She was no longer the frightened girl running through dark forests. She was no longer the servant who believed herself unworthy of love. She was Lyra of House Ravencrest, soon to be Queen of the Northern Territories. She was the wife of the Alpha King, the woman who would help reshape a kingdom, the future mother of children who would know they were precious from their first breath. She was exactly who she was meant to be. "Come," Kieran said, as the palace bells began to ring, calling the kingdom to witness their coronation. "Let's go claim our crown." "Our crown?" "Everything I have is yours now, remember? Crown, kingdom, heart, soul, it's all ours to share." Hand in hand, they walked back toward the palace, toward the ceremony that would make their union official in the eyes of gods and mortals alike. Behind them, the garden bloomed in the morning light, and ahead of them stretched a future bright with promise. Lyra had spent her whole life running towards something she couldn't name, and now she finally understood what it had been. Home, love, belonging. The simple, extraordinary miracle of being chosen and choosing in return. She was done running. She was ready to rule. And in the golden light of dawn, with her hand in his and the Northern Territories spread out before them like a promise, Lyra knew without doubt that some love stories were strong enough to last forever. Theirs would be one of them. Where in the Northern Territories would you want to live, dear listener? In the mountain villages where the moonstone rings are crafted, among the scholars in the great libraries of the capital, or perhaps in the peaceful farming communities that would flourish under their just rule? Let us know. Your choice might just inspire the next chapter of our story.